I tell this story not for my own honor, for there is little of that here, and not as a warning, for a man of my calling learns quickly that all warnings are in vain. Nor do I tell it in apology for St. Benedict's school, for St. Benedict's school needs no apologies. I tell it only to record certain foretellable incidents in the life of a well-known man, in the event that the brief candle of his days may sometime come under the scrutiny of another student of history. That is all. This is a story without surprises. There are those, in fact, who say I should have known what would happen between St. Benedict's and me, and I suppose they are right. But I loved that school. I gave service there to the minds of 3 generations of boys, and always left upon them, if I was successful, the delicate imprint of their culture. I battled their indolence with discipline, their boorishness with philosophy, and the arrogance of their stations with the history of great men before them. I taught the sons of 19 senators. I taught a boy who, if not for the vengeful recriminations of the tabloids, would today have been President of the United States. That school was my life. That is why, I suppose, I accepted the invitation sent to me by Mr. Sedgewick Bell at the end of last year, although I should have known better. I suppose I should have recalled what kind of boy he had been at St. Benedict's 41 years before, instead of posting my response so promptly in the mail and beginning that evening to prepare my test. He, of course, was the son of Senator Sedgewick Hyram Bell, the West Virginia demagogue who kept horses at his residence in Washington, D.C., and had swung several southern states for Wendell Willkie. The younger Sedgewick was a dull boy. I first met him when I had been teaching history at St. Benedict's for only 5 years, in the autumn after his father had been delivered to office on the shoulders of Southern patricians, frightened by the unionization of steel and mine workers. Sedgewick appeared in my classroom in November of 1945 in a short pants suit. It was midway through the fall term, that term in which I brought the boys forth from the philosophical idealism of the Greeks into the realm of commerce, military might, and the law, which had given Julius Caesar his prerogative from Macedonia to Seville. My students, of course, were agitated. It is a sad distinction of that age group, the exuberance with which the boys abandoned the moral endeavor of Plato and embraced the powerful, pragmatic hand of Augustus. The more sensitive ones had grown silent, and for several weeks our class discussions had been dominated by the martial instincts of the coarser boys. Of course, I was sorry for this, but I was well aware of the import of what I taught at St. Benedict's. Our headmaster, Mr. Woodbridge, made us continually aware of the role our students would eventually play in the affairs of our country. My classroom was, in fact, a tribute to the lofty ideals of man, which I hoped would inspire my boys, and at the same time to the fleeting nature of human accomplishment, which I hoped would temper their ambition with humility. It was a dual tactic, with which Mr. Woodbridge heartily agreed. Above the doorframe hung a tablet, made as a term project by Henry L. Stimson when he was a boy here, that I hoped would teach my students of the irony that history bestows upon ambition. In clay relief it said, "I am Shutruk Nahunte, king of Anshan and Susa, sovereign of the land of Elam. By the command of Inshushinek, I destroyed Sippar, took the steel of Naram-Sin, and brought it back to Elam, where I erected it as an offering to my god Inshushinek." Shutruk Nahunte, 1158 B.C. I always noted this tablet to the boys on their first day in my classroom, partly to inform them of their predecessors at St. Benedict's, and partly to remind them of the great ambition and conquest that had been utterly forgotten centuries before they were born. Afterward, I had one of them recite, from the wall where it hung above my desk, Shelley's Ozymandias. It is critical for any man of import to understand his own insignificance before the sands of time. And this is what my classroom always showed my boys. As young Sedgewick Bell stood in the doorway of that classroom his first day at St. Benedict's, however, it was apparent that such efforts would be lost on him. I could see that he was not only a dullard, but a roustabout. The boys happened to be wearing the togas they had made from sheets and safety pins the day before, spreading their knees like magistrates on the wooden desk chairs, and I was taking them through the recitation of the emperors when Mr. Woodbridge entered alongside the stout, red-faced Sedgewick, and introduced him to the class. I had taught for several years already, as I have said, and I knew the look of frightened, desperate bravura on a new boy's face. Sedgewick Bell did not wear this look. Rather, he wore one of disdain. The boys, 15 in all, were instantly intimidated into sensing the foolishness of their improvised cloaks, and one of them, Fred Masudi, the leader of the dullards, though far from a dullard himself, said, to mild laughter, "Where's your toga, kid?" Sedgewick Bell answered, "Your mother must be wearing your pants today." It took me a moment to regain the attention of the class, and when Sedgewick was seated, I had him go to the board and copy out the emperors. Of course he did not know the names of any of them, and my boys had to call them out, repeatedly correcting his spelling as he wrote out in a sloppy hand, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, all the while lifting and resettling the legs of his short pants in mockery of what his new classmates were wearing. "Young man," I said, "this is a serious class, and I expect that you will take it seriously." "If it's such a serious class, then why are they all wearing dresses?" he responded, again to laughter, although by now Fred Masudi had loosened the rope belt at his waist, and the boys around him were shifting uncomfortably in their togas. From that first day, Sedgewick Bell was a boor and a bully, a damper to the illumination of the eager minds of my boys, and a purveyor of the mean-spirited humor that is like kerosene in a school such as ours. What I asked of my boys that semester was simple, that they learn the facts I presented to them in an outline of ancient Roman history, which I had whittled through my years of teaching to exactly 4 closely typed pages. Yet Sedgewick Bell was unwilling to do so. He was a poor student, and on his first exam could not even tell me who it was that Mark Antony and Octavian had routed at Philippi, nor who Octavian later became, although an average wood beetle on the floor of my classroom could have done so with ease. Furthermore, as soon as he arrived, he began a stream of capers using spitballs, wads of gum, and thumbtacks. Of course, it was common for a new boy to engage his comrades thusly, but Sedgewick Bell then began to add the dangerous element of natural leadership, which was based on the physical strength of his features, to his otherwise puerile antics. He organized the boys. At exactly 15 minutes to the hour, they would all drop their pencils at once, or cough, or slap closed their books so that writing at the blackboard, my hands would jump in the air. At a boys' school, of course, punishment is a cultivated art. Whenever one of these antics occurred, I simply made a point of calling on Sedgewick Bell to answer a question. General laughter usually followed his stabs at answers, and although Sedgewick himself usually laughed along with everybody else, it did not require a great deal of insight to know that the tactic would work. The organized events began to occur less frequently. In retrospect, however, perhaps my strategy was a mistake, for to convince a boy of his own stupidity is to shoot a poisonous arrow indeed. Perhaps Sedgewick Bell's life would have turned out more nobly if I had understood his motivations right away and treated him differently at the start. But such are the pointless speculations of a teacher. What was irrefutably true was that he was performing poorly on his quizzes, even if his behavior had improved somewhat, and therefore I called him to my office. In those days, I lived in small quarters off the rear of the main hall, in what had been a slave's room when the ground of St. Benedict's had been the estate of the philanthropist and horse breeder Cyrus Beck. Having been at school as long as I had, I no longer lived in the first-form dormitory that stood behind my room, but supervised it, so that I saw most of the boys only in matters of urgency. They came sheepishly before me. With my bed folded into the wall, the room became my office, and shortly after supper one day that winter of his first-form year, Sedgewick Bell knocked and entered. Immediately he began to inspect the premises, casting his eyes, which had the patrician set of his father's, from the desk to the shelves to the bed folded into the wall. "Sit down, boy." "You're not married, are you, sir?" "No, Sedgewick, I am not. However, we are here to talk about you." "That's why you like putting us in togas, right?" Frankly, I had never encountered a boy like him before, who at the age of 13 would affront his schoolmaster without other boys in audience. He gazed at me flatly, his chin in his hand. "Young man," I said, sensing his motivations with sudden clarity. "We are concerned about your performance here, and I have made an appointment to see your father." In fact, I had made no appointment with Senator Bell, but at that moment, I understood that I would have to. "What would you like me to tell the senator?" I said. His gaze faltered. "I'm going to try harder, sir, from now on." "Good, Sedgewick, good." Indeed, that week the boys reenacted the pivotal scenes from Julius Caesar, and Sedgewick read his lines quite passably and contributed little that I could see to the occasional fits of giggles that circulated among the slower boys. The next week, I gave a quiz on the triumvirate of Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar, and he passed for the first time yet, with a C+. Nonetheless, I had told him that I was going to speak with his father, and this is what I was determined to do. At the time, Senator Sedgewick Hyram Bell was appearing regularly in the newspapers and on the radio in his stand against Truman's plan for national health insurance, and I was loath to call upon such a well-known man concerning the behavior of his son. On the radio, his voice was a tobacco drawl that had won him populist appeal throughout West Virginia, although his policies alone would certainly not have done so. I was, at the time, in my late 20s, and although I was armed with scruples and an education, my hands trembled as I dialed his office. To my surprise, I was put through, and the senator, in the drawl I recognized instantly, agreed to meet me one afternoon the following week. The man already enjoyed national stature, of course, and although any other father would no doubt have made the journey to St. Benedict's himself, I admit that the prospect of seeing the man in his own office intrigued me. Thus I journeyed to the capital. St. Benedict's lies in the bucolic equine expanse of rural Virginia, nearer in spirit to the Carolinas than to Maryland, although the drive to Washington requires little more than an hour. The bus followed the misty serpentine course of the Passaic, then entered the marshlands that are now the false brick suburbs of Washington, and at last left me downtown in the capital, where I proceeded the rest of the way on foot. I arrived at the Senate office building as the sun moved low against the bare-limbed cherries among the grounds. I was frightened but determined, and I reminded myself that Sedgewick Hyram Bell was a senator, but also a father, and I was there on business that concerned his son. The office was as grand as a duke's. I had not waited long in the anteroom when the man himself appeared, feisty as a game hen, bursting through a side door and clapping me on the shoulder as he urged me before him into his office. Of course, I was a novice then in the world of politics, and had not yet realized that such men are, above all, likable. He put me in a leather seat, offered me a cigar, which I refused, and then with real or contrived wonder, perhaps he did something like this with all of his visitors, he proceeded to show me an antique sidearm that had been sent to him that morning by a constituent, and that had once belonged, he said, to the coachman of Robert E. Lee. "You're a history buff," he said, "right?" "Yes, sir." "Well, then take it. It's yours." "No, sir, I couldn't." "Take the damn thing." "All right, I will." "Now, what brings you to this dreary little office?" "Your son, sir." "What the devil has he done now?" "Very little, sir. We are concerned that he isn't learning the material." "What material's that?" "We're studying the Romans now, sir. We've left the Republic and entered the Empire." "Ah," he said. "Be careful with that, by the way, it still fires." "Your son seems not to be paying attention, sir." He again offered me the box of cigars across the desk, and then bit off the end of his own. "Tell me," he said, puffing the thing until it flamed suddenly, "what's the good of what you're teaching them boys?" This was a question for which I was well prepared, fortunately, having recently written a short piece in the St. Benedict's Crier answering the same challenge put forth there by an anonymous boy. "When they read of the reign of Augustus Caesar," I said without hesitation, "when they learn that his rule was bolstered by commerce, a postal system, and the arts, by the reformation of the Senate, and by the righting of an inequitable system of taxation, when they see the effect of scientific progress through the census and the enviable network of Roman roads, how these advances led mankind away from the brutish rivalries of potentates into the 2 centuries of Pax Romana, then they understand the importance of character and high ideals." He puffed at his cigar. "Now that's a horse who can talk," he said. "And you're telling me my son Sedgewick has his head in the clouds." "It's my job, sir, to mold your son's character." He thought for a moment, idly fingering a match. Then his look turned stern. "I'm sorry, young man," he said slowly, "but you will not mold him. I will mold him. You will merely teach him." That was the end of my interview, and I was politely shown the door. I was bewildered, naturally, and found myself in the elevator before I could even take account of what had happened. Senator Bell was quite likable, as I have noted, but he had without doubt cut me, and as I made my way back to the bus station, the gun stowed deep in my briefcase, I considered what it must have been like to have been raised under such a tyrant. My heart warmed somewhat toward young Sedgewick.